Hey leaders, have you ever wondered how student-led discussions around identity, justice, and current events can actually strengthen collaboration, not just in classrooms, but across an entire school community?
Intentional and purposeful focus on building a culture of collaboration is the secret for leaders striving to make a difference. In building a culture of collaboration, Kurtis and Lorna Hewson will share simple tips, ideas, and strategies to take your organization's collaborative efforts to the next level.
Welcome to another episode of Building a Culture of Collaboration. I'm Kurtis Hewson, lead learner and co-founder of Jigsaw Learning. My other co-founder, Lorna, who is normally joining me in these podcasts, is out working in a school today, so she can't be here, but we're super excited to be joined by Dr. Lindsay Lyons, an educational justice coach who helps schools and districts co-create feminist, anti-racist, civics-based curricula, equitable policies, and authentic opportunities for student voice. Lindsay is a former NYC public school teacher, holds a PhD in leadership and change, and is the founder of the Time for Teachership blog and podcast. In today's conversation, we'll explore how student-led discourse, values-driven conversations, and adaptive leadership can make collaboration across classrooms and schools, and what leaders can do to make collaboration authentic and sustainable. So, welcome, Lindsay. So great to have you on our podcast.
I am so excited to be here, Curtis. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, before we jump into the work that you do, and I've got some questions that I want to dig into with you, we always like to offer those that are listening or viewing a first minute freebie, something they could take away in the first minute of our conversation. So I'll turn it to you. What is something that you could share with our listeners and viewers that could be an immediate takeaway for them to support building their culture of collaboration?
Yes, I love this question. So I would go to the Values in Action website, which is viacharacter.org. They are amazing. And what you can do with that is it gives you language for values. Sometimes we talk about values and it's like, well, give me an example, right? And so they have, I think it's like 27, 28 values that they call character traits or values. And you can put that language up on your walls of your school. You can use it to anchor an appreciation for others that you collaborate with. So thank you for your hard work today. That's a value, right? I saw that when you did XYZ. You could also use it as a foundation for like a class or staff charter of these are the values we hold dear, and it's going to inform our discourse agreements, for example. So there's a lot of other stuff that's really great on that website, but I would just say like start with the values, normalize the language, and find ways to use it.
Awesome. We'll make sure that that link is also put into the episode notes here as well. So, Lindsay, I would love to hear a little bit of your background. I mean, I shared it in the intro bio, but I know that only skims the surface. Tell us a little bit about your experiences that have led you to this point and what it is that you do with schools and districts.
Yeah, so I never was going to be a teacher. My parents were both teachers. And so I was like, oh, I see the grading at night and I see the hard things. And then I realized in college, I was down the path of like, I was a dual major in sociology and gender women's studies. And I'm trying to work with adults to kind of recover from challenges that are already present in the world. And I was like, you know what? We just need youth to just be better than our current adults. And so let me work with youth. And so ended up teaching social studies and actually got to develop my own course that I taught at 3 different schools in New York City, which is rooted in like feminist, anti-racist content and pedagogy. And so that has been the kind of trajectory of how I landed in education. And then I realized like other people are interested in this work, or maybe they're doing some piece of it in like a typical social studies curriculum or something. Or a staff is like, we really want to transform our equitable assessment system because it's not equitable right now. And there's so many of these pieces of discourse and how we seek to understand versus seek to be heard, and like all these shifts that have to happen.
Mhm.
And so I realized that a degree in leadership would help me with that. And so learned a bunch of leadership theories and now kind of like smushing them all together to make things effective in schools.
Isn't that what we always do
That's
as
right.
leaders is smush these ideas together to make them make sense? So I want to go back to the classroom base, and I know that you
Yeah.
engage in a lot of student-led discussions around identity, justice, and how they connect with current events. So How can school leaders, in your perspective, support and foster these conversations in ways that build connections and collaborations across classrooms in a school?
Yeah, that's such a good question because often when we talk to teachers, it's like, here's what you can do. But for
Yeah.
leaders, I think there's this modeling that has to happen because a lot of times teachers, I mean many adults, I'm speaking for myself as well as many adults I know, right? We need a model of how to do things differently and not just say, oh, I know how a class discussion goes. Like I know what, and as the leader, I think part of that is learning that yourself and modeling with staff. So if particularly in the States, the last year or two, there's a lot of political discourse that is very what I would call like attack and defend mode. So there's like, I have this position, you have that position. There's no seeking to understand. There's no discourse that's generative. We're often not like respecting the other person's human dignity and trying to uphold it, right? And so we need to learn to do it better. And so I know a lot of times people are avoidant to talk about politics in schools. You don't necessarily need it to be about politics, but it could be, hey, what's going on with this group of kiddos? They're struggling. Like, let's talk about it and let's say the thing that we're kind of nervous or having some big emotions about.
Yeah.
Um, and let's kind of work through that. And so I think part of that is like, again, modeling what are our underlying values? What's a baseline understanding? Like, for example, we'll never blame the students or the parents, right? Like, we're going to own our responsibility. And if that's a baseline understanding, then you're kind of normalizing the conversation, owning what you can do. And like, I think that sets the stage for some really nice generative change in other areas of the school. But just that kind of modeling is helpful, as well as one other piece would be like co-creating the indicators of what it looks like to have effective student-led discourse, particularly when we're used to doing things one way, where the teacher is kind of the filter of like, okay, this student talks, it's filtered through the teacher, and now I'm going to call on someone else who has their hand raised. Very different from I'm going to sit on the outside of a circle when kids are talking and I'm not going to speak. And so as a leader, I need to know and I need the teacher to know I want to hear those students struggle with silence. I don't want you to jump in and always
Right.
direct, right? And that's a huge shift that's like alleviating the stress of the teacher and getting clear on what's my role as a leader when I'm coming in, what do I want to actually see in action?
So we hear this all the time on this podcast, the idea of getting clarity, and I'm a big believer in co-create the clarity. Don't
Yes.
just, I've got the clarity and I'll tell you what it is, but co-create that. So what you're suggesting is when we're co-creating that, one of the things might be, for instance, we will see students, in your specific example, struggle with silence and know that that's okay. And on the flip side, we might do a, we will not see teachers in responding to every opinion or voice that is surfaced. Am I catching that correctly?
Exactly. That's perfect. Yep.
Yeah. I use that strategy a lot in the work we do of what does it look like and what would it not look like just to get that clear. So then
That's so
give me an idea that when you're co-creating that with schools, you mentioned one of we will see students struggle with silence.
mhm.
We will see um, students' voice predominate or predominantly in the conversations, not the teacher. What might be other look fors that you would, um, from your position and your experience, Lindsay, what are some of the other look fors that you would be putting in place to know that, yeah, we've got a school that is really engaging in effective student-led discussions?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And of course, it would vary K through 12.
Yeah,
But I was a high school teacher, so I always start at the top. And I'm like, here's how you could scaffold it down. But I think the things that we often think teachers need to do, like transfer that to students. That's like the biggest shortcut. So I think about in a discussion, historically, traditionally, right, the teacher will summarize or they will call out an important point that was made, like, oh, let's sit with that, right? Or they will say, okay, I'm noticing we have two groups of thought here. Like, let's explore this dichotomy further. Or they'll pose a question to further conversation. Like, all of that, the students can be doing. And so basically, you're just transferring all of these really high level kind of synthesizing moves to the students. And then for the teacher role, what you're kind of replacing the talking with, I would say the teacher is doing some data collection. That could be a lot of things. That could
yeah.
be, I'm going to do like a spider web diagram of how the conversation is bouncing around. It could be a transcript that I'm maybe even using technology to actually do, or I might be just writing notes. I might be categorizing the way students are engaging. So, oh, that student asked a question. That student shared a claim and evidence, right? I might also be noting nonverbals. So I might be writing down like, okay, this student, their head popped up when this came up. They didn't say anything, but they were really attentive. Or this student is really good at maybe not speaking, but jotting notes and kind of like mapping something about the conversation. So that's really important to name. I think we privilege a lot of times like the verbal voice. And so finding other ways to elevate like the really fantastic listeners and listening and synthesizing that's happening that might be nonverbal too.
Well, and to me, I think what I'm also hearing, and this comes up as a consistent theme on this podcast, is helping to create the psychological safety
Yes.
within the classroom that students can express their voice. And I know a big part of that psychological safety is ensuring everyone has a voice or that there's equitable voice that goes
Yeah.
through. So would you say that's also a role as a teacher of, we haven't heard from these three students, or Kurtis has been dominating this conversation. How do we help flip that? How do you respond?
Okay, love that question. One, I would say the end goal is that students are actually doing that, inviting
Right.
students in.
So I'm teaching the students how to
Yes.
be able to say, this is what I think. Lindsay, I haven't heard from you for a while. What do you think?
That's exactly right. And I've seen kids do it, and it's incredible when it comes from another
Yeah.
peer. They're just way more willing to share. But I do think that in part of it, there's that responsive kind of teaching element. I would also say that sometimes what helps is on the planning side, like before we're even having the conversation, thinking about a couple different aspects of the discourse. So one is what's the format that it's taking place in. So, for example, for student stories, I would like to use circle. I would use a talking piece. Every student gets to touch it and then choose to pass or share. Versus a Socratic seminar, there's no hand raising. You're kind of jumping in and finding, when you can do it. It's more academic. So that privileges a certain type of like student mindset, right? Versus a human barometer activity. Do you agree or disagree with the statement? Move to that side, small group discussion. Why? Now share out with the class. Like they all kind of advantage specific skill sets of students and specific dispositions of students. And so I would also try to think about like the arc of discourse. Michael Kay talks about how he calls it threading, how we don't have just one conversation. In his case, his book is about race. He's like, we don't have one conversation. And that's the only conversation we'll ever have. We solved racism, right?
Yeah.
Like he's like, we thread it through everything. We can always come back. And so I think about how teachers can pre-plan both in format and ways we invite collaborative discussion, but also like how we thread over time to build conceptual understanding. Like that can happen in the planning phase so that there's less kind of responsive stuff needed because all the students will get their opportunity in a variety of discourse formats. Like they'll find the ones that fit best for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. So I'm envisioning that I'm wanting classrooms where this is happening, Lindsay.
Yeah.
That students are leading and engaging in these conversations and on some really difficult topics,
Yeah.
obviously. I think this then means as a leader, my staff meetings look different
Oh, yeah.
when I'm trying to like you talked about the importance of modeling for this to be an expectation in the classroom, and then we come to staff meetings for me to tell you everything that's happening in the upcoming week or whatnot. I see that our meetings at the adult level have to change. How would you respond to that? We'll be right back to continue this episode. We have all felt like this before when engaging in team meetings, feeling like our time is not being maximized or that this could have just been an email. As a leader, how can we ensure this is not the reality for everyone in the room? Rather than just simply coming together into a shared space, we really need to ensure that whenever we are engaging as a team in meetings, that the time is being utilized to its utmost and that we are truly seeing impact as a result of our conversations. My name is Kurtis Hewson, lead learner and co-founder of Jigsaw Learning. In this free on-demand webinar, I'm going to be sharing with you 5 planning considerations and then 5 facilitation considerations that you can put into place as a leader to take your team meetings to the next level. Access this webinar, and in addition to these 10 considerations, numerous free resources will be shared that you can begin using immediately. I can't wait to have you join me to learn how we can ensure that team meetings are having their optimal impact. And now back to our conversation.
For sure. 100% agreement. Like,
Yeah.
yes, I think that the talking at, like if it can be a Loom video, we don't need to meet about
Yeah.
it, right? Like if it can just be sent in a memo, like we don't need that. And I just, especially being now distant, and I don't know if this resonates with you as well, but like as a person who is coaching, consulting, and not part of the same day-to-day school structure and community persistently, I miss the collaborative nature of teaching in a school and being
Yeah.
part of that community or like a teacher team. And I even more so now being away from it, see the value of the PLC time, the team time, the whole staff time. Like my kind of question for setting an agenda as a whole staff like facilitator would be, what do these folks who are going to be in this meeting, like what is the most valuable use of our time together?
Yeah.
What do they need to know from each other? So whether that's bringing in student work, we could look at student transcripts of a discussion. Written work is usually common, right? It could also be like student experience data. Like I asked 10 kids who have been struggling why they think they've been struggling or what's going on for them this week or what could I do differently, right? Like whatever it is, or I just had this experience trying this pedagogy that we all said we wanted to try, like bring that into the space. And I think that's how I would design as a leader is like, okay, we want conversation and data sharing about this. So then we need to design this really differently to maximize the participant voice. I guess it would be teacher voice in
Yeah.
that case,
Yeah.
just like you would do for a teacher to say, all right, I want students talking 75% of the class time, so I need to design differently than me talking 75% of the class time.
Oh, and this is huge that if that becomes an expectation in the classroom, how can I make sure that it's lived in our staff room?
Yes. Yes, I love that.
Absolutely. I love that. So you mentioned before, Lindsay, that, you know, when it comes to politics, to racism, to some of these topics, I know that sometimes not just teachers, but schools avoid
Yes.
because of how much pressure can come with that, or even um, fear of how much damage can I do if the wrong thing gets said. Like you're talking and supporting educators in diving into some pretty difficult waters potentially. How do you respond or help support a classroom teacher, if you want to go there, or even a school that is really hesitant to get into these discourses just because what if I say the wrong thing? What if a student says a wrong thing and oh boy, we've just opened a really, really contentious can of worms.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. That's like the question about
Yeah.
about all of this. So thanks for asking it. I think there's a few different approaches to this. One is we have to set the foundation for perceived psychological safety, as you said. So, a lot of times we'll say, "Oh, this is a safe space," but we can't just declare
Oh,
the space safe. That's just not how it works, right?
I often talk about we have to practice how
Yeah.
we would talk together. Like we almost have to structure the conversation in a practice format to
Love that.
get good at it first. Like you're right. You can't just say, "Hey, we're all safe here. Just say what you like."
Exactly, exactly. And so we have to build up, is there a baseline understanding that we're not going to do X, like we're not going to violate dignity in this way, right? So one of the very common ones around issues related to identity that I would use for students is like, we will never deny that people have a right to food, water, and shelter, right? Like that's what we're going to say. And so anytime that you advocate a policy position that says, oh, these people shouldn't have housing, well, we violated, we're not going to entertain that idea, right? And
Right.
so I do think, particularly with student conversations, there are some specific barriers that we just kind of like guardrails we almost put in
Yeah.
place. But then I also think entry wise, emotion and story are two really good entry points. So what I've done at conferences where I've just met the 30 people in the space and we're going to now have a conversation about a hard thing, I might say, okay, here's this video clip or here's this headline. Everyone share one word of how you're feeling right now. And that's the start,
Yeah.
right? So we're not coming in with, oh, I'm like, I think this, or I'm on this position, or I disagree. We're instead just saying, oh, I feel maybe angry, maybe sad, maybe nervous to have this conversation, right? And so you get the emotion out there. And you also can say, if you don't have words, you could write a picture, you could do a movement. People have showed me with their face how they feel, but didn't want to say the word.
Right.
Like there's so many entry points there. And then the next piece might be, tell me a story about this. Like, what does this make you think of? So you're inviting connection, you're accessing background knowledge for students. This is something teachers do in an academic sense, but not usually like a personal emotional sense. So
Mhm.
it might be, a story of migration, and a student in the class is like, well, this is very similar to my migration story that happened last year, right? Or whatever the case is. There's usually, it could be like, I saw a movie about migration. Like, it doesn't have to be their lived experience, but some sort of connection to an experience with
Yeah.
emotion.
And I like that idea of it doesn't have to start with a charged discourse.
Yeah.
Uh, I like the one word or draw a picture, and then we're going to scaffold and build upon that.
Yeah. I also think I'll just add one more tiny thing, and
Please.
that's like a framework for reflection. So sometimes it's have the conversation and then reflect. And the reflection sometimes is more important than the conversation itself, because the conversation is practice. As you said, right? We got to practice. And so when we practice, then we have to have time, as we would with students, to go back and say, okay, how did that go? Because we maybe didn't do that the way we ultimately want to. So what will we change? And so Dr. Cherie Bridges Patrick and I came up with a little framework we adapted from Juan Eichelt's. And so there's like kind of four quadrants. It's hard to explain. Sorry. I'll link it for you guys
Okay.
so you can see. But basically, there's like these axes of like comfortable, uncomfortable. And then there's like repeating the same patterns and possibilities for change. And so to have possibilities for change and to have really generative discourse, we need to get a little uncomfortable. And
Mhm.
so we have this top quadrant where we want to be, which is like we're connecting and growing. This is my like elementary, middle school adaptation of kind of the high school level we started at here.
Yeah.
But basically, here your brain is focused, your heart is full, your body feels awake and safe. Like that's where we want to be. And what often we find is there's three other quadrants that are way more common. And so, particularly with adults and politics, we have attack and defend. So, this is the I will never agree with you. We're uncomfortable, but we're just repeating the same pattern. So,
Yeah.
change is not possible. Or we're avoiding. And we just say, oh, there's no problem here. Or like, oh, we don't talk about that here. Right. So we stay comfortable, but we're still repeating the same things in our heads. Or we have kind of what's very common in like white liberal spaces, which is like share information. Oh, I read about, I heard about. And so we have this academic kind of way of talking.
Mhm.
Cherie talks about this as like intellectualizing, but we're not, our heart's not connected. We're not connecting it to the emotion or the stories that I suggested as an entry point. So it's like kind of the combination of the story, the emotion, and kind of the academic or larger understanding of the problem that enables us to connect and grow and thrive in discussion.
Awesome. So I often when we're talking about setting up strong collaborative cultures in schools, we do the same thing of, okay, at the end of this meeting, let's take a moment to we've have norms established. For instance, one of our norms might be that we respect and value everyone's opinion. Okay, let's take a moment and talk. How do we do on that today? How do people feel? And sometimes it might be a simple strategy of let's just do a fist of five on how you feel, or everyone's going to write something down, or like you said, I like that idea of what's one word that comes to mind when we reflect on that. I I agree with you. I think that reflection is so important to kind of build the skill set that needs to go deeper and deeper.
Yeah. And what's cool is like the practice element of this is present everywhere. So we
Yeah.
can have this discussion at school and realize, oh, we were really in kind of avoidance mode. There's some things that I wanted to talk about, but I just didn't say it. And then you can go home and in a completely different conversation about a different topic with your kids or with your spouse or with whoever, you can now practice not avoiding. Okay, so there's something that I want to say, but I'm feeling uncomfortable. Like, let me practice saying it. And so we're constantly practicing these skills. And if we can name the thing that we need to change about the way we engage and talk, then we can just practice it all the time, which is super cool.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm interested in going into some of the learning and the study that you've done around shared leadership and adaptive leadership. What are some strategies that you've seen leaders implement that are, I guess the easiest way to say it, high leverage
Yeah.
strategies to bring about that shared leadership? Because in my mind, this all connects. That if students are having a voice, we want to have staff have a voice, And that really does come from a leadership perspective. So I'll turn it to you. What would you see in your mind leaders doing, the practical strategies to enable that?
Yeah, okay, I love this. And so my dissertation was literally like, yeah, we're all talking about how it's great, how student voice is great and shared leadership is great, but no one's talking about the strategies.
Yeah, how?
I'm always finding that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I studied like what are the actual mechanisms for effective student voice. And I'll start, I guess I'll back up just a bit and say my definition of shared leadership is effectively, I think a lot of times teachers talk about distributed leadership. That's a common phrase where like,
Yeah.
okay, teachers are taking part in the decisions and they're on the leadership team too. And mine just is inclusive of students as well, with one additional understanding, which is students are young people with totally great skills and as with adults, are building up other skills. And so the structures and the skill building support that is needed for students to be effective when brought into things like decision making teams is often missing. And that's a component of shared leadership. So it is, yes, the access to the decision making table, but it is also all of the structural aspects and the skill building elements that now enable them to be successful there. And so I'll share, like, maybe I'll start with a couple stories. I talk about
Yeah,
stories
please.
before. Yeah. So I think one example of a story that I heard is from the superintendent in Massachusetts, Darcy Fernandez, who said, you know what, we are struggling with student voice. We think we need some serious transformation to go on in our district. We have a 5-year strategic planning process coming up. We need to build this, like, what is our strategic plan? And so she, over time, figured out how to invite all stakeholders, family and students, to join various committees. So she found a way to say, okay, we're going to break these into pieces, these different committees that are going to support the strategic planning process. We're going to invite students and families and teachers to say, what are you interested in? And then we're going to have them sign up and we're going to build around their schedules opportunities to come together and build out those parts of the strategic planning process.
Hmm.
Taryn Gavan, who is a Texas principal of an elementary school, said, we're going to use the Leader in Me program, which is like Stephen Covey's work,
Yeah,
and
very
talked
familiar.
about, yeah, so it was like, we're going to have a student, staff, and parent lighthouse teams. And so we're going to have these student leaders kind of in this team that enables us to, what she effectively did at the end was brought them all together. So we had a multi-stakeholder kind of leadership team that had been well trained in all of these different skills and then put them to good use in making decisions. And then we have a high school in Pennsylvania who basically they're like ninth grade, you come in, we're going to teach you all about the Constitution and how we have structured our student governance is in like the United States government. And so we have these different branches and you're going to learn how to like do that. And so they have all sorts of checks and balances which privilege and advantage student voice over teacher voice, although there is a little bit of teacher's voice in there. But just recognizing that, you know, students are like the vast majority, like 95% of the population of the school, not teachers, right? And so they advantage that in the representation of their governance structure, which is super cool. And so the mechanism, sorry, to get back to the mechanisms, what I would say is like one of the most important mechanisms is really mindset. And so Michael Fielding in the student voice literature calls this radical collegiality. And so just this idea that educators learn and become more effective when they see students, and I would argue families too, as partners, and that they all share responsibility for student success. So
Right.
as a leader, I might be looking for indicators of that in a staff meeting or even, you know, the teacher lounge. If I am hearing, oh, but those students don't care, or those families don't, like if we're blaming students and families, that might be an indicator that this is something we need to bring into space and talk through
Right.
and be able to kind of transform into a radical collegiality mindset. The representative leadership team should be between 6 and 15 members, we've found. The
Yeah.
15 is like, we want everybody involved, but 15 just gets really unwieldy and they can't actually make productive decisions. As much as possible, you want the ratio of adults to students to be a little more like higher students, more number of students than adults.
Yeah.
Because what happens is the students effectively are silenced because they get overwhelmed by, by like the power dynamics of the adults. Um, the governance structure, I think one of the big things that people do, we see people like, oh, yep, we got radical collegiality, we got representative leadership team, and then it stagnates because they don't clarify. These types of decisions are going to be shared by everybody. Uh, and which means, and then they would say, okay, we're going to make a draft of this policy. each representative is going to bring it back to their group. So students go talk to the student body, parents go talk to all the family members, right?
Yeah.
And then we will come back, redraft, and approve by consensus, for example, versus other types of decisions, which are like, okay, like we are going to, as this shared leadership team of 15 people, we are going to decide, and that decision is final. Versus something a leader might just have to make a decision on and not
Right.
actually involve everyone. And so that clarity, if you don't have it, it really undermines any structures that you've put in place, to like the vast detriment of future things, which is kind of wild. I would also say stakeholder research to inform decisions. So like Shane Safir's work in street data, thinking about student experience data, family experience data, and training people to be able to gather that data. So your student leaders, train them in a specific like a student to student interview strategy, or running a Kiva panel, or my favorite is photo voice. And so thinking about like how we can create basically photo essays of student experience to put on display and interpret and learn from.
Mhm.
But without the tools to figure out how to do that, then like we can't really collect all that data, and which we can then use to inform our decisions. And the last one is really, really seems minor, but is so important.
We'll be right back to continue this episode. Are you meeting with your team in the hallway, staff room, conference room, or at the back of a classroom? We know that physical space is at a premium in most buildings. However, it is important to consider the impact that your meeting space has on the functioning and well-being of your team. Download our free Leader's Guide for planning spaces for collaboration. This guide will help to determine and plan for the best space for your teams, including considerations that contribute to effective meeting spaces, a checklist to be used when planning the space, and other additional resources. Access the guide at bit.ly/space checklist. That's bit.ly/space checklist, all one word. Get ready to ensure your meeting space is optimally configured to have the greatest impact possible for your next team meeting. And now back to our conversation.
And the last one is really, really seems minor, but is so important. Is just that we should meet consistently at the same time and in the same place.
Now,
And one of the things that we found is when people change the room at the last minute, but they only tell the teachers, and then the students get left out of the memo, right? And then they're walking around the hallways like, I don't even want to do this anymore because you just didn't invite me to the, like, it is kind of wild. As well as thinking about the accessibility for after school things. A lot of my students would work like 20 hours a week at least to help their parents pay rent, and they can't go to after school stuff. So now they're completely off the board in terms of having an opportunity to meet with a leadership team. And so thinking about how do we embed it potentially in the school day has been a really effective strategy for a lot of particularly high schools, but schools.
I, you know, and Lindsay, I absolutely love this. I'm taking notes here as well. I think the meeting consistently is important, but even the consistency of what happens in those meetings is
Yes.
also important. We talk a lot of times that when people come into a space for discussion, I mean, when people say, I wish we could do away with all meetings, I know they're not what they're saying is, I wish we could do away with unproductive or unfocused or meetings where we don't accomplish anything. A meeting where we're moving forward, when we're making decisions, when we're impacting change, those are invigorating. But I think the consistency in that space, if I come into that meeting not knowing what this is going to look like or what to expect, that puts me on edge right away. And I'm using a lot of my cognitive load in that. Where's my safety within this? So I'd love to hear your thoughts as well on something that you pointed towards about, not changing the meeting space, but I would also argue how the meeting space is designed is really critical to the conversation. If we all come into a room and let's, for instance, imagine that it's a classroom with student desks put into rows, and we just say, all right, everyone sit down, and now my back's to you in the conversation, the environment is actually not conducive. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do you create the environment, like the physical environment, to really impact strong collaborative conversations.
I love that question. And I have to say, this is not something I researched, but totally should. This is a nice follow-up study. So I think that you design the same way you would with a staff meeting or like a lesson for with students, because again, you're thinking about that filter question. What is the thing we need to get out of our short
Yeah,
time
what
together
is the
with these
purpose?
people?
Yeah.
Right. Yes. These people in the room have something to share. Like, what's the thing? And so, I mean, you could, again, like similar to a lesson, you could break it into kind of these buckets, kind of like Darcy Fernandez said, and we're gonna have these groups focused on these things.
Yeah.
So it's actually gonna break out into small groups, and you have partners or triads, and you're all kind of doing your thing, and then coming back and sharing out.
Yeah.
It could also, again, I always like circle because there's like this equity of voice that's really beautiful, and everyone gets to kind of just literally stare at each other with no, usually no desks or anything in front of them. And so
Well,
just
and
being
that
able,
way you not just hear, but you catch the nonverbals too.
yes,
Like I
good.
I can't, if someone's behind me, I can't see the eye roll that happens when somebody else says something, which is that means a lot.
That is such a good point. I never thought about that, but yes, exactly. And so I wonder if there is some sort of like opening circle. Everyone gets to share something about how they're coming into the space, what they learned this week, whatever the frame is. And then we kind of do our thing. We share, maybe it's small group discussions, right? And then we come back and we close. And we have some sort of, I can't remember who it is now. I think Lipton and Wellman have a book called Groups at Work.
Yeah.
And they talk about how there is like different types of discourse. One of them being decision making, which is a very particular type of kind of talking and conversation where we have to figure out how we decide what to do next. And I think that is often lacking from spaces like this, particularly because kids aren't used to it, but also like I think adults sometimes aren't used to it as well. We just say like, okay, well, majority rules, or okay, the leader's going to make the decision about the next action steps, or we have a laundry list of 50 ideas, but what ones are we actually doing? We're not going to try to do them all. And so I think too, having one clear protocol on maybe each subgroup decides on one action step using fist to five, three and
Yeah.
above means consensus. Something basic that's like, we're going to do this to your point every time.
Yeah. Oh, and I love that doesn't just happen by saying we're going to meet at 2:30
Yeah.
today, right? Like it's just like a classroom. You've got to plan and structure what that looks like for you. Lindsay, this has been fantastic. I would love to hear how can people get in touch with you? How can they learn more? Where do they go to continue in this learning or this discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. I am not on social media very much, so I do have a podcast and a YouTube channel. So those are like my most social media-esque things. They're all linked on my website, so lindsaybethlyons.com. There's also free resources there, as well as an option to just sign up for 20 minutes to talk because I'm a nerd and I like talking about education with anyone. But you can also email me at hello@lindsaybethlyons.com.
Excellent. I'll make sure all of that information is linked in as well. Lindsay, this has been an absolute honor to be able to chat. And I've been furiously writing notes as we go along. I know that we could keep going on this, and we'll look at maybe having a chance to bring you back on to talk further in a future episode.
I would love to. This has been an absolute blast. I love how we were talking about this before we hit record, but how synergistic so much of our work is,
Yeah.
and so much of educators' work is. So I appreciate the work you do.
Thank you very much. So take care, and I know that we're going to be chatting again soon.
Thanks, Curtis.
Thank you. Wow, so much to take away from that conversation with Lindsay. And I definitely would encourage people go check out those resources that she shared. Go look at the show notes. She's sharing some other resources that we'll make sure get put into that space. So I yeah, I really, really value the idea of thinking about voice. How are we accessing voice of in the classroom of our students, of our staff, and then even from a leadership perspective, are we bringing our student voice into the decision making within our school? I really, really appreciate the getting crystal clear on what are the decisions that this group is going to make. I can see that being really, really valuable to be able to clarify that for instance, in this staff meeting, here's the kind of decisions we're going to make collectively. Here's the kind of decisions that we are going to leave to our leadership team, but this conversation will inform that decision making, being able to be clear that with this student group, or Lindsay talked about the um, family or parent committees, what kind of decisions they're making, getting really clear on that, I think is super, super valuable. I know that there's nothing that kills collaboration quicker than being able to collaborate, thinking that we're working towards a consensus or a decision on this, just to find out that no, that's not the case and it's getting overruled somewhere else. I also like the reinforcement of thinking clearly about when do we meet, getting consistency in the space, in the process, but then I really like the reflection on what protocol will we utilize, what will be the way that we engage in conversation, in discussion, in perhaps decision making, really thinking about that. And really, it goes back to that classroom of thinking about what's the mechanism, the protocol, the way that we're going to engage in this learning or in this discussion, getting really crystal clear on that. I know that for myself as a young leader, I never really thought about that effectively or consistently. And there would be times where I'd ask a question out of a staff of, let's say, even 20 without thinking about how are we going to engage in this discussion? How will we do that? And then deeply regretting not having a way to engage in that conversation, and getting into a space where we don't hear from some, we hear from a lot from others, and we haven't really thought about how to structure. So I love Lindsay's approach to really thinking about what is the structure and scaffolding. I love that when we're gathering student voice, we don't have to start with getting deep emotional conversations. It may just be one word reactions. I love that idea of practice. And then we can build safety and comfort to be able to go deeper and deeper and deeper. I think that's a really important note to be able to walk away with. So, with that, thank you so much for Lindsay joining us there. I would really encourage you check out the resources that she shared that we'll be putting into the show notes. And as always, we encourage you to join or share our mailing list at jlinsiders.com for weekly content and resources that we know you're going to find valuable. As always, please like, share, review, or subscribe to this podcast, however you're accessing it, and reach out if there's any questions that you have, if there's topics that you'd like for us to be able to look at, or if you just would like to engage in a conversation. We'd love to hear for you. That's easiest way to reach us is questions@jigsawlearning.ca. So with that, always wishing you the best as you endeavor to build a culture of collaboration in your organization. Take care.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.